Perfect. Welcome back, everybody. I was here Monday. And we have Jade entering the room. Um, Welcome back. Um, this is day three, the final day, I believe, of our kind of intensive program. And today, what we're gonna do is get into the mechanics of what we call governance and operations. In the first few days, we're about the why and the what. And today's session is going to be kind of about the how. How do you actually run a co-op day to day? How do you make decisions, hold each other accountable, handle conflict, and kind of keep all the lights on, all while staying true to who you are and your values as a co-op. So, uh, this is module three. If you guys missed day one or two, that is okay. This module does stand on its own, but it does build a little bit on the political grounding and strategy work from earlier, but it's not a pre-requirement. Perfect. Let's start with acknowledging the land that we are on. Before we begin, again, acknowledging that the salt state is located on the Kwalen, Musqueam, Katsi, Semiahmoo, Swasin, Kaikiat, and the Coquitlam territory, south of the Fraser River in Surrey, British Columbia. And we also acknowledge the land that you're on. For those of you here at Dechinta, you're on Yellowknives Dene First Nation territory. And let's look at our roadmap for today. So 4 parts today. Part one is going to be cooperative governance and democratic power, the balancing act, how co-op governance differs from corporate governance, key legal documents and rules. Part two is going to be rights, responsibilities, and accountability. Who does what, who answers to whom, and the three hats problem, plus a little bit of a tiny case study. Part three is going to be HR and operation for co-ops. So kind of workplace culture, conflict engagement, professional development, another tiny case study in here, this one too. And lastly, looking at discussion reflection, connecting governance to your community context and connecting back to the Dene laws. This is a content heavy session. There's going to be feel free to react at any point. And whenever you guys want to, just blurb in. The two case studies are also natural energy breaks between into part 2 and 3. And again, if anyone needs a break at any time, I have scheduled a little break later on, but we'll kind of power through, take a little bit of break, and then power through again. Cool. Go to the next slide. Part one, cooperative governance, building democratic economic power. So again, we're covering 4 things in this. We're going to cover how governance is as a balancing act, how co-op governance differs from corporate governance, key legal documents, and the rules around membership, boards, and shares. This is a more of a conceptual section. The goal for this section is to build shared vocabulary before the practical stuff comes up in parts 2 and 3. So it's kind of like the big picture first. Next slide, please. So this is a core idea. Cooperative governance is about balancing the association, the people, and the enterprise, which is the business. You need both. All community vibes and no business sense won't work. Like if you have all corporation and forgetting the people doesn't work either. There's 3 tensions to hold: purpose and profit, strategy driven by humanistic principles, not singular financial metrics. And it's trickle down. We reject trickle down. Democracy and expertise. One person, one vote, always. But you don't ignore expertise. The membership decides the decision. Expertise informs how you get there. And lastly, independence and collective strength. Your co-op is autonomous, but co-ops are stronger when they cooperate with other co-ops. That's principle 6 from the ICA, which we covered back in module 1. And if you guys don't, that principle 6 is co-ops operate on shared international principles. Those are the ICA principles. So I wanted to see maybe in the chat, based on what you guys are feeling, which of these tensions kind of feel most real to you right now? Feel free to discuss, or if just a quick Like which seems more relevant or you would like to learn a bit more about? Democracy and expertise. Perfect. Yeah, we'll get into that in just a bit. Um cool. So let's stop into our purpose and profit. Yeah. Me too. Amazing. So now let's look at the difference between independence and strength as well. Great. Let's look at what corporation versus cooperative governance looks like now. Side by side, corporate model is profit is the primary metric. Voting power is tied to shares, external accountability to the shareholders. There's a clear default hierarchy, and the governance serves capital accumulation. Think of any organization, any of these big conglomerates or corporations in the world. The cooperative model is kind of flips the corporations a little bit on its head, where people are before the profit. One member, one vote always. There's internal accountability to members, and you kind of strive to avoid hierarchy. And then principles and values underpin the rules. I want to be honest though, even the way the solid state sometimes operates and how we've operated in the past and how some of the co-ops operate. Co-ops are not immune to hierarchy, power dynamics, or bad governance. The difference is that the structure is designed to resist those things. Whether it actually depends on the people and the practices. We've acknowledged there have been instances where you realize these imperfections in co-ops, and it helps actually build trust with participants who've seen dysfunction in organizations before. So now that we know a little bit about the difference, what documents kind of hold these things together? Next slide, please. Perfect. Co-op governance is built on self-imposed, democratically created rules. There's 4 layers. The first layer is the Act. The Act is the legislation that enables the co-op's legal existence. In BC, it's the BC Cooperative Associations Act. In the Northwest Territories, it's the Cooperative Associations Act. Everything must align with it. In any cases where something that you propose in your organization is up against the Associations Act, the Associations Act will always take precedence. The memorandum sets the basic legal framework, the purpose, and the share structure. The rules, or sometimes they're called bylaws, are how the co-op actually operates. Membership, board structure, voting, shares. This is where real governance lives. And lastly, policies, specific operational guidelines created under the authority of the rules. Think of it this way. The act is the ceiling. The memorandum is the foundation. The rules are the walls, kind of binding it together. Policies are the furniture. You can rearrange the furniture, but you can't really knock down a wall without the membership voting on it. Does that kind of make sense? Does that metaphor kind of make sense? Just a quick thumbs up. Amazing. So what do the rules actually cover? Next slide, please. So the rules cover kind of 4 main areas. They cover membership rules, including member meetings. They cover the board rules, structure, authority, meetings, share capital and structure, and not-for-profit rules around surplus distribution and dissolution. We're going to touch on each, not like a legal textbook, but I want you guys to all know what to look for when you're reading or writing your own rules. We'll start with membership first. Actually, before we get into it, just a tiny note before we get into the membership rules. The Cooperation Associations Act actually has templates that you can actually follow and use those as a great baseline and then build on top of those. So with that being said, let's go into the first area, which is membership rules. There's 2 big areas. Who can join and who can be asked to leave. Eligibility. Rules must describe who a typical member is. They must outline specific obligations, work hours, service use, production requirements. They must identify the formal admissions process, usually board approval. Expulsion, clear grounds, clear procedure. Typically requires what we call a special resolution, a higher threshold vote. And just if you guys want to know how that process works, you actually fill out what we call a special resolution and submit it to your registry, the BC online registry that takes care of the rest. Members have the right to appeal to the full membership. For multi-stakeholder cooperatives, you need conditions for each member class. So conditions for shares, board representation, and voting rights. Multi-stakeholder cooperatives are less common in the Northwest Territories context, but it's worth flagging for community-based models. So how do members actually exercise their power? Next slide, please. So there's two meeting types. The AGM, the annual general meeting. You do a first one within the 3 months of incorporation, and then annually within 4 months of the fiscal year end, decided by the cooperative. The SGM, which is a special general meeting, is as needed for urgent or foundational decisions, major expenditures, significant rule changes, kind of like an emergency meeting. So what do members vote on in these meetings, specifically in the AGM? They elect the board. You can change your rules or memorandum, dissolve the cooperative, membership termination, merger, taking on additional capital. These decisions belong to the membership and not the board. Has anyone been a part of an AGM or a general meeting before for any kind of organization? If you have, could you maybe talk about, or feel free to type a little bit, or if you could unmute yourselves and quickly just explain how was that like being a part of an AGM or a general meeting of any type of organization? I'll give a couple minutes or a minute if anyone's typing in the chat. Rules heavy. Yeah, that's kind of the how it usually is.
Yeah, I'll
Kind of,
say it feels it's like a necessary evil sometimes. Where you're like, okay, I know we have to do this, and there are steps that we must follow to say that we did these things. And um yeah, it just can be a bit stodgy and it yeah, I don't know that I've ever looked forward to an AGM.
yeah, and I think the chat is kind of reflecting that as well. Feels like a very bureaucratic task or a very experienced, some really sloppy, some really concise. I think it's one of those things where like, shoot, AGM coming up, we got to just go through it. One thing that we've done to just additional context to try to make our AGMs feel a little bit um more lively is we kind of treat it almost as a celebration in a sense to celebrate all the successes and celebrate the idea of community to make it feel less bureaucratic to some extent. But at the end of the day, there are rules you follow. You try to keep it concise and try not to do too much. Um, Cap says, I've also been to good ones with great year in review content to update members, but this is more relevant for our wider membership who aren't staff or exactly. And that's kind of how Solid State operates. So we do that larger year in review almost. Amazing. So now this is kind of the member meetings and the member side of voting. So now let's look at what the board looks like. Next slide, please. Perfect. The board talks about structure. It talks about how many directors, what does quorum look like, can non-members sit at the board, authority. Here's the important part. By default, the board holds all the power of the association unless the rules specifically limit them. If your rules are vague, the board can almost do anything. Want to limit spending or investment authority? You have to write those in. Share structure. Every member needs at least one membership share. Investment shares are optional for raising capital. Non-member rules must be defined, and rules should state maximum holdings and transferability. Member finance through loans or retained patronage dividends is also an option. Yeah. So just emphasizing, I know this is a lot of like, I'm trying to see how I can break this down. But it's a lot of like, you want to make sure you get your rules really right the first time. The second there's a little slip up, a little bit of silence in the rules, it kind of equals unlimited board power. So you want to really take your time and draft it up as an organization to make sure your rules are covering exactly um, what they need to cover. And again, feel free to connect with Dabney and we can deliver over some resources, which are more in-depth guides of how to actually go ahead and fill out a memorandum of association and how to actually write rules that reflect who you guys are as an organization. Let's take a little bit of a break. Is everyone good to take a little bit of a break right now? We've covered a lot of law. You've earned it. Um, how long of a break do you guys need? Maybe we could take a quick couple minutes. If anyone needs to talk about perfect. And now we are talking about rights and roles. And so I want to make sure you guys can hear me properly. Cool. So this is part two, and this is what we're going to talk about: rights and roles. So this talks about a little bit more about Drew, what you were asking earlier of who does what and who answers to whom. There's three big roles. There's members as owners. It's kind of the source of all authority. There's the board of directors who kind of focus more on the governance and strategic direction. And then there's management and staff, which are the day-to-day operations. Let's break each one down. We'll start with the members first. So you see members and then the big brackets is owners. Members are the why of the co-op, the source of all authority. Um, the rights that members have is they vote at general meetings, one member again, one vote. They elect and remove directors. They approve changes to rules and memorandum. They access financial information. They receive patronage dividends if applicable, and they can also appeal expulsion decisions. Again, the members have that power because it's written in their rules. Responsibilities, members being a part of a co-op also means that you have to participate in meetings and democratic processes. You have to fulfill any member obligations if there are. You have to purchase membership shares if they're at what price they're agreed on, and just stay informed. And this one's important. The biggest thing is respect the democratic process and decisions, even when you disagree. The last one is particularly hard. Democracy means sometimes the group decides something that you necessarily don't like. You had your voice, you had your vote, and now you commit to the decision. You don't have to necessarily like it all the time, but you have to respect uh, the process. Does that kind of make sense? And no, it sucks because sometimes you'll get into a meeting and things are great and everyone feels the same way, but sometimes there's disagreements. And so respecting the process is a very important way that we kind of make things fair. Now let's talk about the board. The board translates the members' why into a long-term what. The powers. The board sets strategic direction. They hire and oversee management, establish policies, approve budgets, and have access to all organizational information. But responsibilities, they also have what we call a fiduciary duty, which means that they're going to act in the co-op's best interest. They're going to ensure that the cooperative is legally compliant, report transparently to the membership. And a big thing is they don't micromanage daily operations. They maintain and also they maintain confidentiality where appropriate. But the key tension is by default, the board holds all powers unless the rules specifically limit them. Getting the rules right matters. Emily has a great question. Have you ever seen a co-op off offer or offer without a board? Yes. Actually, what we'll see, for example, I'll give an example. We have a co-op of five members who started a video production cooperative. Uh, they don't necessarily have a board, but they're because they're five members. They, if elected, all five of them sit on the board of directors as well. So they all work for the co-op, but they're all directors of the co-op as well. When you actually go to incorporate, you have to have a minimum of three people in the cooperative and three directors. And so those directors are your board. So legally speaking, there has to always be some sort of a board, whether it be a board for a nonprofit or a board of directors. Did that kind of answer the question?
Yeah, actually, I can testify to that. I am part of a workers' cooperative called Black School, and we are just a group of five workers. And because we're just in, I think, year three of being a co-op, we're still quite young and quite small. We don't have that many gigs happening, but we've grown a bit more. And for the past 3 years, we've been both the worker owners and the board of directors, which is easy, yes, but it means we don't have much advice and direction in if we're serving our community correctly, because we do the day-to-day operations, right? But now we're getting to the place where we have more work, we have more community interest. We want to bring on more members, and we're going to start looking for official board of directors to guide us. So yeah, it can happen, and it's a process. So
And we have another good question is how does a co-op reconcile striving not have hierarchy when board has all the powers? Um, I think an easier way to put it is in a co-op, the board isn't really above the members. It's more of like a committee that the members elect to handle the day-to-day decisions so that every single member does not have to vote on every little thing. The members still hold the real power because they choose who sits on the board. They can vote them out, and major decisions like changing the bylaws still go to the full membership for a vote. So it's less of a hierarchy and more of a division of labor. The board does the work of governing, but only because the members have delegated that responsibility to them, and the members can also take that back. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, I have a follow-up question too, which I guess maybe I'll just say rather than type it.
Yeah.
Um, so that makes sense if there's like a very egregious thing that happens on the board that the members would vote them out. But what would happen if there's just smaller decisions like the board institutes a policy that the members don't agree with? Like, is there any paths for the members to be able to disagree with that, or do they just have, or is it like kind of all or nothing? You either go with what they say or you vote them out.
So you're saying like, what if the board, again, in this example, puts together a policy that the members don't particularly agree with, and so
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, so with the board authority kind of, I want to make sure I get this right and to because I'm trying to think of how it would work. I'm trying to because there's legal implications to it too. Because the board has a fiduciary duty to the members. Um, hmm, let me see. I'm trying to think of the co-op laws and what would be. Trying to make sure I want to get it right the first time. Okay. So the board can't just what do you call it, impose a brand new policy right off the bat. When they do introduce a policy that the members generally oppose, the members have, legally speaking, several options. They can raise objections, obviously at board meetings. They can also petition for a special membership meeting, which is one of those special general meetings, the SGM, to vote on the issue, or actually work to recall and replace the board members who have enacted the policy. If the policy conflicts with the co-op's bylaws, the articles of incorporation, or any laws, members can also challenge it legally because, again, those legal documents take precedence over everything. Ultimately, because cooperatives also are democratically governed, like I mentioned before, the board authority derives from the membership. So if enough members organize and vote against a policy, they have the power to overturn it, or they'll be able to elect new board members at will. Does that kind of answer it?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks.
Yeah. And again, we see this happening a lot more in larger cooperatives. At Solid State, the types of co-ops that we operate with are usually smaller in size. So you'll see that mostly all the members who are actively working on the co-op are actually sitting as board of directors as well. So they're all working together on the same thing. What you'll see often is when you have like a larger co-op, say it's like a co-op grocery stores, for example. And like, yes, there's a board for the grocery store, but then there's all the members who buy into the grocery store. So they all have a vote, but to vote on the bank. Or if you're a part of like Van City, Van City to all its members does send a letter out saying, come to our AGMs, come to our board meetings. And if enough members and there's like specific legal structures protecting them. But we see these type of issues come up more and more in larger cooperatives, but in smaller cooperatives where you're a team of probably under 10, usually what happens is, or it's all stay, what we done is those members all sit and as part of the board of directors, kind of mitigating that, mitigating any potential harm that might come from that. Does that kind of make sense? Hopefully.
Yeah.
Cool. And then going back to kind of the board.
Sorry, just to add. Yeah, the board has a duty to work in the interest of the co-op members, not above them or against them. So usually it's easy to dispute that.
And then again, the default is the board again hold all power unless the rules specifically limit them. So that's why getting the rules right again matter. And so then we ask, why does it matter that the board shouldn't micromanage? Like, what happens when they do? And that's where staff comes in. Staff is what we handle operations. They execute a strategic plan through the daily work. The rights that they have is they have fair compensation, safe conditions, clear job expectations, professional development, information access, and labor law protection. A lot of this stuff is very clearly just part of our BC law as well. The responsibilities they have is to execute the strategic plan that the board has set, report to the board, maintain transparency, follow the policies, and contribute to a healthy culture. And here's the thing about worker co-ops, and you'll see at the bottom it says, staff actually are the members. They hold operational responsibilities and ownership rights simultaneously. And that's what we call the three-hat tension, and that's where it lives. Next slide, please. So now this is what we call the three hats problem. One of the most important slides probably today. In a worker co-op, a person can be a member, a director, and staff all at once. So member hat. At a general meeting, you vote as an owner on direction, rules, and board composition. Fantastic. Your board hat. At a board meeting, you govern as director. You guide strategy, policy, and management oversight. And then staff hat. On the floor, you work as an employee to your own co-op. You're accountable to the board. You're following policies, and you're executing the plan. The key is knowing which hat you're wearing at any given moment. When the lines get blurred, things get messy. Someone uses board power to avoid staff accountability, or ownership status to override a management decision. The key to having that is having clear processes that keep the line from blurring. I was going to ask if anyone has any experience. Can anyone think of a situation where any additional things where these hats might conflict? I think a big one is like we just mentioned. Like, let's use the grocery store as an example. Is, or I guess I'll let you guys speak first. If anyone has an example that you think that could come up. If not, it's completely fine. Cool. I can I'm thinking like the grocery example or like I'll give one of our co-ops examples to make it easier. We have, again, going back to that video production cooperative, we have a member hat. So they started and voted on their direction, their rules, and board composition. It was a little bit easier because they're all board members. And at those board meetings, they kind of talk more about strategy, policy, and management oversight. Again, it's kind of sometimes odd to think about because you're managing yourself in a sense, but it's important to have processes. So when you're in your board hat, you're doing policy generation or strategy. And then their day-to-day where they work on getting clients and again, kind of serving themselves, but you're kind of serving yourselves up to a degree. So it can definitely get a little bit confusing and blurry. And so that's why having processes regarding each of those things is super important. And so that brings up the idea of what we call accountability. And so let's kind of take a look at the full accountability picture. So here's the accountability table. Members are the why. We talked about this. They're the source of all authority. They set mission, the vision, the values, and they vote in the board. They elect the board, and accountability flows up to them. Board. The board, or the board of directors, is governance and strategies. They again translate the why into a long-term what. They set guardrails, hire management, or whether it be themselves, accountable to the members, and they're agents of the membership. And management and staff. Operations. They execute the what through daily work, and they're accountable to the board. The key insight is in a worker co-op, again, person may wear all three hats, but each hat has different responsibilities and different accountability lines. After our three hats discussion, this should land differently. So do you guys again understand, like in a larger co-op, this can definitely be a lot more easier to understand because you're like, okay, you have a board for the members and their staff operating. But in a smaller co-op, it becomes a lot more difficult because everyone is doing multiple tasks at the same time. Does that kind of make sense? A quick thumbs up or a thumbs down? Or reaction of any kind. Cool. So let's look at a little case study, and hopefully this can kind of help understand this a little bit better. So here's a scenario. The cleaning co-op is TCC, is a woman-led cooperative at Solid State. They just hit $1 million in lifetime revenue. I have to jump off early. Yeah, of course. And again, Emily, the recording will be there. So if you ever want to look at it later, we'll be here to answer any questions. Amazing. Cool. And so it's amazing. Like TCC hit $1 million, and this is a real figure, one of our more successful cooperatives. The team is deciding whether to reinvest that surplus or issue bonuses. They're torn. Should they reward the hard work that got them here, or should they reinvest everything and think about long-term sustainability? If you were a worker owner in this group, in this co-op, what would you do? And if not, like just think of like, or you don't even have to answer, but just think about what you would do, just to get your mind thinking. So would you reinvest that surplus or issue bonuses? So I want you guys to think about the idea of, in this scenario, who would make that decision? Is this a board decision or a member decision? What do the co-ops also think about? Like, wait, do the co-ops rules say anything about surplus distribution? And how do you balance the short-term needs of workers with long-term viability? So thinking about whose decision is this? Is it the board or the memberships? And which hat are you wearing when you're arguing for bonuses? You can understand how sometimes it can get very difficult or very tricky at times. Does anyone have any ideas? Want maybe take a crack at it? There's no right way.
Your bonuses come because your capital investment in the first place, like that revenue sure looks great right now, but it won't look that great if we all go on vacations, because in turn, like we can go on vacations with the money that we made, that we have in our own savings account, but this one's gonna be reinvested into our business, into our co-op. We're gonna make more money next year. Like, and all the members, not just ourselves who are getting bonuses, but every member is going to make more money next year, because this is our revenue, right, from the co-op. Not like dividends that can go back to us, and then we can make the same revenue next year. That's not what I see.
Yeah. So what Jade, you're mentioning is this this idea of strategy, and you're like, okay, well, our strategy thinks if we have a strategy that we're actually aiming for a specific figure, we're gonna actually reinvest everything so that we can actually aim for higher bonuses or higher dividends come next year. Holly and Patrick say maybe check in with the policy and strat direction. And so I just wanted to make that connection of the governance connections. So surplus distribution, so we have extra money on top, is usually a member decision. This is at the AGM level. The board make a recommendation to be voted on by members. Yeah, that's also an opportunity. So again, this is great because you just kind of read my mind right there. So surplus distribution is what we call typically a member decision at the AGM level. The board might recommend, but the membership ultimately decides. The not-for-profit rule from slide 9 earlier apply here. If someone is arguing that they need more bonuses because they personally need the money, at that moment they're wearing their staff hat, not their member hat. Both are valid, but they just need to be separated. So this is a good way to think about it. So let's move to part 3 to kind of figure out the practicality and the operation side of things. So HR and operations. No worries, Diana. Thank you again so much for coming. Cool. So HR and operations, running the co-op day to day. So in this one, we're going to be covering workplace culture, conflict engagement, and professional development. This is what makes the difference between a co-op that works on paper and a co-op that works on practice. So we'll start with workplace culture in the co-op. Next slide, please. So here's a line to remember. Culture isn't separate from governance. It's how governance feels in practice. There's 3 pillars: shared decision-making, flat or rotating structures, and active participation, not just permission. You can't just tell people that they're allowed to speak up. You have to create the conditions where they actually do. Transparency, open books, open meetings, open communications. Members should know how the co-op is doing financially and operationally. No surprises. And finally, values and action. Workplace culture is where co-op principles live or die. Democratic rules on paper aren't enough. They need to be felt daily in how you run meetings, how you handle disagreements, and how you welcome new members. And then speaking of disagreements, next slide. This is what we call, when disagreements happen, we have to engage in what we call conflict engagement. Notice the word engagement, not resolution. Co-ops call it engagement because conflict is natural in democratic workplaces. When everyone has a vote, disagreement is a feature rather than a bug. Why it's different in a co-op. Flatter power dynamics mean that conflict surfaces differently. Community consultations can bring in outsider perspectives, and critically, policy should be written before conflict happens, not in response to it. If you wait until there's a crisis to write your conflict policy, you've already lost. There's a clear escalation path, though. Step 1, what we do is peer conversation, direct and honest dialogue between the members. Step 2, facilitated mediation. A neutral member from outside comes and helps. Step 3 is a committee review where you kind of designate a conflict committee or a little working group. And step 4, board involvement. Only when the lower levels cannot resolve it. Most conflicts should stop at 1 or 2. If everything goes to the board, then something is broken in your culture, not just in the conflict. Let's test this with another case study. Here's a scenario. Tyche is the media production cooperative that was mentioned earlier. An oil company, all these case studies are actually real. An oil company reached out to them to film an ad campaign for their newest investment. Some team members are excited. It's a big opportunity. It'll bring exposure. It'll let them partner with a large-scale organization. But part of Tyche's stated values is supporting mission-aligned brands that support green energy. So there's a conflict. How should they approach this conversation as worker owners? How do they ensure that the brand's values and all members' opinions are heard and honored? So in this, just going off, I'll give you a few minutes to think about this, but this kind of hits multiple points at once. The values in action that we just talked about, conflict engagement, And again, that three hats problem, because all five of these members are board members, are members of the co-op, and their staff. They work for the co-op. Someone might want to take the contract as a staff member, thinking about the workload and the revenue, while opposing it as a member, thinking about mission alignment. There's that tension there. So I guess more so, which co-op principle is most relevant here? And what does the escalation path look like if the team can't agree? Any thoughts? Feel free to, any ideas, put them in the chat. I'll give another 30 seconds, and then we can dive into this as well. The mission would take precedence over staff preferences, right? Anyone else? Cool. After kind of the discussion, I feel like the appropriate way to do this would be going back to the escalation framework. So this would start as a peer conversation, step one. If there's no consensus, it would kind of move on to what we call the facilitated mediation. If it touches the co-op stated mission and values, which it does, it might actually become a membership level decision and not a staff level one. The question isn't just, do we take the contract? It's the who has the authority to decide it. So in this case, what ended up happening was, as staff members, they were like, great, this makes sense. We should do this revenue-wise. But they realized that this question was not a staff level one. It was a membership level decision. So when they went back to their membership, going back to the co-op's stated mission and values, they realized at that point that actually this is something that we can't take on because of how our co-op's mission and values are stated. And as a member, help them understand the decision better. And it's weird sometimes. You're like, but I was down to do it because I'm staff and I want to get more money. But now I have to think about it a bit more introspectively and realize, wait, this actually isn't the right decision because I'm not thinking at the staff level, I'm thinking at the membership level. Does that kind of make sense for people? Amazing. So now let's talk about what we call, speaking of people, let's talk about investing in your people. So here's what we call professional development. Investing in the worker owners is not overhead. It's kind of core infrastructure. And there's three types of ways you can invest in them. Number one is skills training. There's technical skills, financial literacy, industry knowledge. These strengthen every member's ability to contribute meaningfully, whether you can get them enrolled in a course or buy them a software that could work. Then there's what we call governance capacity. This is training in how to do meeting facilitation, consensus building, how to read financial statements, and think more strategic. The skills of democratic ownership. What this actually helps is this helps to build co-ops literacy of how to actually operate the co-op. You're a member, but what does a member mean if your members don't know how to be good members? You can't vote well on a co-op finances if you don't know what a balance sheet is. So for example, one way that we tackle this at Solid State is, so Solid State is a nonprofit, but we operate as a cooperative. But when we go through our finances, we actually take some time and actually break down what any of these decisions might, what any of these words and these financial literacy terms might mean. We actually try to make it as accessible for our staff to understand what we're talking about, so everyone feels just as informed to be able to make a decision. And lastly, there's mentorship and skill sharing. Just the experienced worker owners can mentor newer members. Peer learning keeps knowledge inside the co-op and builds collective capacity over time. And also, like, skill sharing can happen from cross co-ops. At Salt State, we help build a lot of co-ops, so oftentimes we'll see co-ops reaching out to other co-ops to learn more. That's also a great way to do some skill sharing. And funny enough, this training you're in right now, this is also professional development. This is building your guys' governance capacity. So now let's tie everything together in with three big picture connections. Next slide, please. So there's the linking. Governance as a tool for the solidarity economy. there's 3 slides to close part 3 and connect everything that we've covered to the bigger picture. Firstly, democratic governance is not just internal processes. It's a direct challenge to how power is organized in the economy. Every co-op practicing one member, one vote is building an alternative to shareholder capitalism. And it is happening in real time, not just in theory. Governance structures create the rules of the game. Co-ops choose rules rooted in equity, not extraction. And when co-ops cooperate with other co-ops, Principle 6 from ICA, governance becomes a tool for building collective economic power across communities. Second connection, accountability as a movement infrastructure. Next slide, please. Again, accountability as a movement infrastructure. Clear roles, member, board, staff, aren't bureaucracy. They're how democratic organizations stay democratic as they grow. When accountability flows upwards to its members, it inverts the power structure of conventional business, and that's the point. Co-ops that get accountability right become models for other organizations, movements, and communities. The solidarity economy needs institutions people can trust. Transparent accountability is how co-ops earn that trust. And finally, next slide, the third connection, linking operations as prefigurative politics. Prefigurative politics, it's a fancy term, but it's a simple idea. Building the world you want to live in right now in how you operate. How a co-op handles conflict, trains its people, and builds its culture is a daily demonstration that another economy is possible. Professional development doesn't just serve the business, it builds the community capacity that ripples outwards. And every co-op that models healthy, democratic operations makes it easier for the next ones to exist. Does that make sense, everybody? How does that feel? I want to make sure there was a lot of tying back. And again, you'll have access to all these slides. And lastly, the final part 4. 4 discussion questions. We don't need to get through all of them. We're just going to go where the energy is. So I want to ask people real quick, what governance structures, formal or informal, already exist in your community? And I want to let you guys reflect, but I want to see what comes up. I have a few thoughts of what could potentially come. And think about your community, think about your families, just learning a bit more of that. I'm hoping that everyone is typing. If not, I can feel free to I'll just talk and you guys can feel free to put stuff in the chat if it comes in. But going back to kind of speaking on my experience, like in my community, most of the gaps in service provision in Inuvik are filled by nonprofits that are often starved of resources and completely volunteer dependent. Okay. So that's a very very kind of formal but also informal structure that is now being brought up by volunteers through that community organization. Going back also thinking of in my life and where I grew up in Pakistan, there were a lot of these informal decision-making processes. You just kind of and I guess it sounds weird, but in a way, the governance structure was listening to my grandpa growing up, or listening to my grandma growing up, because they know best for they know we're a member of the family and they know the best strategy for the family, and I have to act as staff to make sure that I trust them. It's a weird family analogy, but it kind of talks about those 3 hats again. And you'll notice that a lot of the stuff that we talk about is going back to module 1 and what we talked about on Monday, this idea that a lot of the stuff that we do is very innate to us. It already exists within our cultures, within the way we operate. whether it's elder circles or community organizations that do that work. All this exists. And I want to ask the second question is what happens when in Dawson City, Yukon, there's a lot of informal mutual aid supported by the city or other orgs. For example, when there's flooding, the city drops off a bunch of dirt in a pile with sandbags, and the community gets together to fill sandbags to bring cold water. Like that's an amazing example. I think of where it's informal, but the community comes together and bands together to make that work. Um, that's actually a really good example. Very relevant as well. I want to add the next question, and I want you guys to tell me how you feel about this. Is how do you balance formality with leaving space for humans to be humans? And this is going back to some of the other questions as Cap, when you mentioned earlier, is how well, what if the board comes up with a policy that the members don't really appreciate or the staff doesn't really appreciate? It's how do you balance that the written rules and the relational trust both matter just as importantly. And I think co-ops allowing people to be people also is an interesting concept to think of because yes, you want to be bound by something legal to protect yourself, but at what point do you also just let people be people? And again, we don't have to talk on this or speak on this, but it's something to think about. Again, noticing the understanding that rules and relationships both are equal and both matter. Cap says what you said at the very beginning about how just because the rules are in place, such a non-hierarchy, whether it works depends on people involved. Exactly. People are such an important part to this whole cooperative model. People are the cornerstone of how this model works. And without them, nothing kind of operates the way it needs to be. And then again,
I have
yes.
a suggestion. In my co-op, we figured at some point we were getting super burnt out from the work, and we knew we had some funds that we had reinvested, some surplus, and we put aside a wellness fund. Obviously, we're not as big enough to offer like healthcare benefits like a corporation would have, a bigger one. But we were able to put aside some wellness funds to maybe go see a movie together so that we are connecting as humans outside of the work. Or get access to therapy services for those who want. That was an intentional effort we made to save some money to do that or apply for funding that allowed us to do that.
Yeah, I think that's just a great example of balancing the business. But as I mentioned, for different between co-ops is it's very people first, and you want to take care of your people, and the profits will come. And I think that's a really cool example that I think we should encourage more people to kind of take space for themselves. And again, just reminding of this idea that it's okay that people, what happens when staff or someone wears multiple hats? And I think what's important is to come back to that three hats framework and taking some time and reflecting of the decision you're making, at what stage is the decision need to be made, and putting on the appropriate hat for that decision. And then I just want to quickly ask is what HR or operational policies would you prioritize building first, like in projects that you guys are working on, or if you guys were doing things like what policies or HR stuff would you want to focus on first? There's examples, something like conflict engagement is a really important one, a compensation framework, an employee handbook, or an onboarding process. There's so many different policies, and obviously it's funny enough because all these things that we're talking about you could teach a whole semester long course on, and so it sucks that we only get to dive just a few moments into each one of these conversations. But again, if you are very energized and passionate about HR operational policies, we have a lot of frameworks that we've built out, and we would love to share all those. We'll put together as much as we can to share with you guys. But we'll also would love if there's something specific you guys are looking for, let us know or reach out, and we will get those resources to make sure you feel fully equipped. Community agreement, code of conduct, onboarding, offboarding seems important to us. Yep, that's a really important one. community agreement kind of even operates as kind of like an informal in terms of legally informal, but also important in terms of but formal in terms of the actual people, how you operate. And I think that's a lot on the staff level if you get to put on a hat. And then onboarding and offboarding is also very important. Is how do you invite people into your culture, and how do you make them feel energized? And offboarding, something that we actually at Solid State have been dealing with, is how do you make sure a transition is in place that actually feels fair and feels perfect to both sides, or good to both sides. Cool. We have one more important connection before we close. We actually kind of worked a little bit early on time, which is great. And I'll go to the last slide real quick, Katrina. Is connecting to the Dean. Can someone please correct me? Is it Dene or Dean? I've been saying Dene, and I think that's the right way to do it. Okay, cool. The Dene laws. Governance does not start with co-op legislation. It starts with community values. And for those of you here from Dechinta, those connections run deep. Share what you have. Connect directly to surplus distribution, patronage, and the cooperative principle of concerns for community. Think about the cleaning co-op scenario we discussed. The question of reinvest or distribute is a governance question, but it's also a values question. Everyone has a right to be heard and take part in the decision. This is the foundation of democratic governance. One member, one vote, already embedded in the Dene practice. And the survival of the whole group is more important than individual accumulation. Directly challenges corporate governance logic. Co-ops exist to serve collective need, not individual profit. These aren't parallels that we're forcing. These are living practices that predate co-op legislation by generations. And we talked about this in Module 1 on Monday. The co-op model is at its best catching up to what many indigenous communities have always known about governance. Again, it's very innate. Does that kind of align well with you guys? Well, thumbs up, thumbs down. The point is, all the values there's alignment with existing values. We're not inventing anything new. Okay, let's close it out. Thank you again for showing up today and engaging with the material. Governance and operations are not really the most glamorous. They are probably the most mundane tasks about building a co-op, but they're the part that makes everything else really fun and exciting and possible. If you are able to take one thing away from today, I want you guys to know that governance is not about control. It's about accountability. It's about making sure that power flows in the right direction from the members up, not the top down. Again, thank you for sharing this space with us. We would love if there's, I'm sorry. Can you describe the difference between a co-op and a nonprofit society? Yes, of course. Do you want to know in terms of like legally speaking, or in what capacity?
I was wondering more like in terms of decision-making structure. And like the board and whether or not staff can be members of the board and how it changes when it's a nonprofit society versus a co-op.
Yeah. So I think off the top in terms of like staffing wise, if you are a nonprofit society, your board cannot be staff. That's just the way a nonprofit operates. So again, a worker cooperative is a business owned and democratically owned by its employees. So members share profits and make decisions together. A nonprofit society is an organization formed for a social or charitable purpose rather than to generate profit. Any surplus revenue will get reinvested into their organization's mission. And another big thing is they rely specifically on grants, donations, and fees for services. There's governance. In governance, both are democratic, but a co-op's voting is its workers, while a nonprofit's board may include community members, donors, or appointees who aren't necessarily employees. And then again, revenue model speaking, co-ops earn money by selling products. Nonprofits supplement their revenue through grants, donations, and fundraising. And then just some other stuff, tax provisions wise, nonprofits can apply for tax exempt status and issue tax receipts for donations. Co-ops are taxed like regular businesses. Some jurisdictions allow co-op tax provisions, but I will say they can, like Salt State, overlap. A nonprofit can be structured with cooperative principles. This is how we operate. Co-op can pursue a social mission, but the core distinction is between the both is the profit distribution to worker members versus reinvestment into the public benefit, which is the mission of the nonprofit.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, feel free to reach out to us. We have a whole lot of co-ops that you can talk to directly or us, and you can learn about how they govern and structure their governance.
Great, thank you.
And again, we will do our best to kind of put together a package to send out to everybody with all the resources. And just want to play around with them and just learn a bit more. And again, if there's anything very specific you guys are looking for, reach out and we will make sure, even if we need to quickly whip up some contextually aware documents, we can do this for you for sure. But again, it's been really exciting. This is the first time I've had the opportunity to